Ukraine is continuing to hold the line against Russian forces, but even Ukrainian commanders admit they need more supplies. Is an unexpected actor coming to the rescue, but is it even going to be enough? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so first off, taking a look at the map, you can see there's a lot of Russian advances that have occurred across the front line, ostensibly. But I want to point out that none of them really are characteristic of a breakthrough. The largest is here, outside Novo-Mykolivka. But you can see that it's mostly just Russian forces advancing across one windbreak and critically getting a small foothold within the town of Novo-Mykolivka itself. And it's not, again, that big a deal because you can see Russian forces here already holding part of the town on the south side of the river, and now they hold part of the town on the north side as well. So again, Russian tactics seem to really be effective at cleaving off block by block of these, what used to be urban areas. Now I'm pretty sure they're just bombed out shells. But it's not really alarming or characteristic of like a larger breakthrough to see this kind of movement along the front lines. And there's even less movement, right? I saw that there was movement in Orlivka and I thought, oh no, like have the Russians crossed the river? No, they have not. This is the Russian advance in Orlivka. You could see they're occupying literally a single solitary building. What an advance, guys. And of course, you've got outside of Terny, which also barely counting as an advance, as you see Russian forces being forced out of this windbreak and advancing in another. So moving towards Terny, but not necessarily in a way that's characteristic of even a meaningful advance, more of what you might think of as like tit for tat or trading one position for another. You can see here, the last one at this Pervomaisk, which is to the south of you see again Russian forces advancing kind of up this roadway here on the way to Pervomaisk, but not really a substantial battlefield change. Now, as it stands right now, there is still reports of the Freedom of Russia Legion and other Russian national militias still fighting in some of these border regions of Belgorod. Now, the Russian government has said that they have defeated these incursions, that they are no longer in danger. They've even released some footage of their border guards attacking armored vehicles crossing the border. But the Freedom of Russia Legion itself has said that, no, we're still operating in this area. We're still in these regions. Again, the actor with the most incentive to lie is by far the Russians in this instance, because of Putin's election in just 2 days. They really don't want to have it publicly known that Russian sovereign territory is not being defended due to basically the Russian armed forces being deployed entirely in Ukraine. So if you're interested in seeing some of the fighting from this incursion, we're actually going to be checking that out later today on combatvetnews.com. You guys know I don't get a ton of sponsors on this channel. I depend on you guys, the viewers, to enable me to continue to do this. So I have tremendous gratitude towards all the supporters, especially the lieutenant and colonel tier supporters. And of course, any one of these tiers is going to get you access to the twice weekly combat video breakdowns. These are the uncensored videos that YouTube won't really let me publish anymore. I do those breakdowns every Tuesday and Thursday on Combat Vet News for members only. So check it out and support the channel. It really, I can't tell you how much. It is the thing that enables me to do this. Due to the fact that increasingly sponsors don't want to be affiliated with any kind of conflict content. And the fact that I've covered Israel and Hamas in the past basically blacklisted me from a lot of sponsors' deals. So again, your support is the thing that enables me to do this. Now, here's where things get more troubling. First off, in an interview with the German news outlet Der Spiegel, unnamed Ukrainian commanders said that almost all Ukrainian units and formations have to husband ammunition, right? Guard and discipline the use of ammunition material because there's an overall ammunition shortage across the front lines. Some Ukrainian units with limited ammo can only hold their current positions if the Russian forces do not attack with full force. So what it seems like is happening, and even General Syrski is out there acknowledging that there's a threat of Russian units advancing deep into Ukrainian formations in some areas of the front line. But here's the thing that we've seen in this conflict is that generally it is hard to attack with full force. The reason is because you have to gather your forces at first, marshal them together, and push in a succinct direction. But the act, due to the high level of drone observation, it's hard to do in secret. So these forces kind of gather slowly, and in turn, the other side, in this case, Ukrainian forces, are going to prepare their defenses. So as they sense Russia preparing an attack, they're going to plus up those defenses, right? Sort of like the idea that you're going to, wherever the enemy tries to penetrate, the friendly forces are able to meet them, even if they don't have necessarily all enough ammunition to stabilize the whole front line. That's not to say things are good, but that's to say that there is a strategy to mitigate this risk, at least for a time. But again, eventually you do run out of ammunition, right? You cannot generate, you cannot win a war with strongly worded language. And that's about all Ukraine will be left with if they're unable to secure additional funds. But on the bright side, the EU has released at least some funds to Ukrainian forces, right? 5 billion euro, that's $5 billion, in military aid for Ukraine. Now remember, 60 billion for a approximate math rate. They said 60 billion will enable Ukraine to fight for around a year, right? So that means that Ukraine's burn rate is about $5 billion a month. So this represents the ability of Ukraine to fight for one more month, which is good. Don't get me wrong, but it's a long way from the 60 billion in aid that the U.S. is trying to push through Congress. And this is just a classic move from the EU, where their awkward, sort of bureaucratized system really prevents movement of any substance, right? And the kicker is that, of course, Europe is the king of the strongly worded language. And he says the message is clear. We'll support Ukraine with whatever it takes to prevail. That's from the EU foreign policy chief on Twitter, which, of course, but we know whatever it takes to prevail may be this month. Right. And the funds, it says, it basically gives EU members refunds when they send munitions to Ukraine. France, who insisted on a buy European policy for arms. But the other countries said, hey, we can't wait for European manufacturers to spin up, right? They have to get these weapons from other sources, right, around the globe. And so it's all really a very, you can just see how Europeanized it is. Germany wanted the donations to take into account the size of the country's financial contributions to the fund. Right, there's some flexibility on the Buy European rules and to count some of bilateral aid when calculating members' financial contributions. Again, this sort of horse trading is just classic European bureaucracy. All this for about 1 month's worth of funds. So again, as I point out, that the fact that the West is unable to support Ukraine in a dynamic way, despite the fact that in both the US and Europe, support for Ukraine is very, very high, right? And it is troubling that despite a really robust level of aid to or support for Ukraine, these political establishments can't actually lack the dynamism to actually do it. And if you're a country kind of on the border, right, between being authoritarian and democratic, you're going to look at the West and you're going to say, yo, you can't do this, right? So here's what I thought was interesting is that here's a poll from the US, right? And Republican and independent views have remained consistent. This is the percent who say when it comes to aid in the Ukraine war against Russia, the U.S. government is spending, right, too little, about the right amount, and too much. So what's interesting is about 45% of respondents of U.S. adults say that the U.S. is spending too much, but about 14% say it's spending too little, and about 38% the right amount. So even as it stands presently, actually, no, I'm sorry, I have this wrong. Only 37% of respondents think the U.S. is doing too much for Ukraine, which means that up to nearly two thirds of American voters think the U.S. is either doing too little or about the right amount, which is interesting because as of February, right, the U.S. had been providing a steady drip of aid to Ukraine. And what's fascinating too is that actually, even among Republicans, support for, or rather, the distaste for aid to Ukraine has fallen. Right? You can see that in November of last year, about 60% of Republicans said we were spending too much to help Ukraine. Now only 55% of Republicans say we're spending too much to help Ukraine, which is fascinating. Understand that, like, again, the fears that a lot of commentators, a lot of Republicans shared, and I reserve a special ire for Dave Sachs because he was all about this. It was their fears of escalation. They repeatedly said that funding the Ukrainians for their big counteroffensive was a dangerous escalation, that Putin would feel backed into a corner by his inevitable military defeat, when in reality it turned out that we were only ever supplying Ukraine at a level that would enable them to continue to fight Russian forces. And in fact, the reality is that the conflict, Ukraine was supplied in a way that kind of ensured a stalemate. And if you're more of a cynic like me, you may even think that the Pentagon supplied Ukraine to a level that ensured that Russia kept throwing troops and material into this meat grinder, right? Because you got to think, if Russia got sandblasted out of Ukraine in the first year, they would actually have taken fewer casualties, right? They'd have more tanks and better troops, and they would still have some high-level equipment in their military. But instead, because they haven't been sandblasted, because it's become a slow bleed, right? Russia sends more and more troops, more and more equipment, draining their defense industrial base further and further, while the Ukrainians continue to get just enough aid to keep grinding them down. And I think that's kind of interesting. And even the U.S. public sees it. They're like, oh, actually, we now know in February of 2024 that U.S. was doing either too little or just about the right amount in terms of supporting Ukraine, right? And very few people think they're out here doing too much. So, and again, the fact is, though, that you can have a very popular policy and it still won't get done in either of these, both the EU system and the American system, right? So very frustrating stuff. Anyway, that's all I had, guys. Be sure to check us out, combatvetnews.com. New videos dropping in a couple hours. Thanks to all the members that support me on there. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.